Okay, this is another new chapter in the second edition in part 2, Approaching the World. It's called Governing and Governmentalization. So let's see what this is all about. The introduction says it should be clear by now that contemporary society is confronted with grave sustainability challenges that require concerted action. It is paramount to ensure that humankind is not transgressing the fundamental planetary boundaries of Earth's life support systems. So we've looked at the planetary boundaries, and despite all the debate, we can use it as a good framework to kind of keep the global view on where we are on all these, biodiversity, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, societies aspiring for sustainable development must also address the actual or potential impacts of a range of shocks and sudden seasonal or steady changes locally. Basically, human impacts. These specific things mentioned, shocks, seasonal and local, are important, but that's just a non-climate person talking here. Some sustainability challenges are new, whilst others have been around since the dawn of civilization. There was always an argument about whether hunter-gatherers were somehow more environmentally friendly and less impactful than us, and many researchers disagree that they were just as a big marauder group of the environment as we were. Population was smaller, technology was not there, so they couldn't do such large scale, such rapid changes that as we do. So some actual sustainability challenges are not yet perceived as such by policymakers and the public, but remain overlooked or ignored. Those that we have enough trouble managing the ones we know, so hard to worry about something we don't know. And if you know, Donald Rumsfeld was a defense secretary under George Bush when the invasion of Iraq happened in the 90s. He used to say, there are things we know, there are things we know that we know, there are things we know that we don't know, there are things that we don't even know that we don't know, and things we don't even know that we know. Yeah, it's a cute thing, but anyway, so worrying about things we don't know is going to be difficult. So those that finally do catch our attention, however, may be transformed into issues requiring governing on the societal level. This chapter is then about governing risk in relation to complex sustainability challenges and the process through which they become something governable in the first place. It's about governing and governmentalization. We'll see what we mean by that. Okay, perspectives on governing and governmentalization. Then there are many ways to I'm taking only a little bit of text, I'm not reading the whole thing, so you should definitely go back and read more if you're interested in details. So there are many ways to approach governing and governmentalization. Whilst no perspective is perfect and all have their strengths and weaknesses, I find more empirically oriented governmentality perspectives and new institutionalism particularly helpful to understand and explain what is going on in this context. Governing and governmentality then. Governing has been on human minds in one form or another since the dawn of civilization. Again, they used to be called power by tributary power. So if you are a tribal leader or you are a leader of a hunter-gatherer society, you had some special character that made you a leader and people followed you, and then rivalries or how you managed your people, all the standard governing issues come up. So this traces to an etymological roots in the Latin and Greek words for steer or to rule, and was a keen interest of famous medieval Arab and Renaissance European scholars. However, it was not until the 1980s that the word governance became ubiquitous, just very recently, amazingly. So governance became ubiquitous, denoting a qualitative shift away from Ibn Khaldun's and Machiavelli's focus on the government of the state, governance versus the government. Instead, governing had had permeated all spheres of society with reference to organizational governance, corporate governance, public governance, global governance, good governance, etc. So all the applications of governance and its multifaceted aspects began to be studied and discussed. Focus shifted from the state and its constitutions to social practices and activities, from hierarchies to also involve network. You can have a tall building with 100 apartments, and you have a society that has rules and regulations by which it governs the building. It's kind of a self-governance, but it's still governance, right? So from hierarchies to also involve networks. Around the turn of the millennium, these ideas found their way into safety and sustainability domains, and notions of risk governance started to emerge. So global governance then became a word as well. Under the UNFCCC, countries began to come together to determine global actions against climate change and so on. Foucault's, again jumping around, Foucault's contributions to the study of governing and power are so influential on our thoughts and practices, as we'll see in a minute with a prop, that his work is used in sociology, political science, human geography, and a range of other disciplines. In a seminal series of lectures at the Collège de France, Collège de France, I'm just trying to my French, in 1977-78, Foucault elaborated the genealogy of the modern state from ancient Greece to contemporary Western neoliberalism, focusing on shifts in the forms of power and the emergence of a new mode of governing. Foucault argues that the direct coercive power that dominated the earlier societies has not disappeared in advanced liberal democracies. Obviously, around the world we still have many elected powerful people. We call them strong men. Trump always comes to mind, but there are many that are around, elected by the people. So what they do after election, or why they're elected itself, may depend on their tendency towards domination, often of one group versus the other, to gain votes from the other group that wants to dominate, and so on and so forth. Nor has the power of disciplinary institutions been relinquished. They are simply complemented by a new form of power penetrating further into our lives. So data gathering, monitoring, the face recognitions, AI, state as the big brother, all these ideas are now around, and people discuss them without understanding what Foucault said or what governance and governmentalization are all about, but still that's what we are talking about. Michel Foucault passed away in 1984, but is still immensely influential. So what is Foucault? What the Foucault, I think you know that is a kind of a parody on something we use on a daily basis. Foucault's initial work on governmentality was further elaborated by his colleagues in Paris, who suggested risk in itself as a central technology and rationality for governing the self and society. Risk is, in a sense, a central rationality for imagining the world as governable, in the sense of being able to intentionally direct it away from futures that, for different reasons, are deemed undesirable and towards some preferable future. So this is a benign parts of governance and government, because you can always have governments, leaders leading you astray, saying there is a danger and we must go in this direction rather than that direction. And this is discussed also in the context of global warming targets. If you say 1.5 degree centigrade is a safe target and we must not cross it, and then scientists turn around and say we are about to cross it, then can a leader use that as a way to say we are getting into a danger zone, so I'm in charge, I'm going to tell you what to do. Some of this played out during COVID-19. The zero COVID policy of China was in some ways government taking over in the name of COVID and doing things that will not work in a real democracy, for example. Okay. So risk also involves technologies for achieving that in practice, most explicitly visible in risk analysis, where calculations provide the foundations for decision making. Okay, so risk involves technologies for achieving the governance or pathway towards deemed undesirable and towards some preferable future. So avoiding the undesirable states and heading towards preferable future, which is what resilience is what about when you have the risk mapped out. The perspective of risk as governmentality is, in other words, fundamental for governing risk in general, since the associated regimes of practices are inherently oriented towards an uncertain future. In other words, it appears impossible to study governmentality of risk without considering risk as governmentality. So we are moving towards human environment systems and sustainability, again with risk as a paradigm for avoiding detours or taking the detour and coming back with resilience towards sustainability pathways. So risk is again a big underlying factor for detouring us from sustainability pathway, which we defined with Human Development Index floor and environmental footprint as outer limit or planetary boundary, right? So if you look quickly here, tools for visualizing risk are central technologies for governing risk. So we have probabilities going from very low to very high and severity going from very low to very high. So you need to have this kind of a map by sector, by location, and so on and so forth, where again you will have to fit in complexity and cascading effects, tipping points, and so on, including uncertainty, ambiguity, emergence, and then putting this in the risk form and then governing risk. Right? So we'll come back and look at institutionalization and the new institutionalism in the next podcast, but you know why this chapter was added as a separate entity, because it is being suggested here that risk is very much a part of government, governance, governmentalization, and that's how you manage risk. So we talked about insurance, underwriting risk, and various other mechanisms, but all of them also work under governance and governmentalization. So see you in the next podcast.